I did it. I torched their worlds and I'd do it all again, Captain Timothy Russell declared, shocking the Intergalactic Tribunal as he confessed to war crimes during the bloody human-Kobali conflict. As one of humanity's greatest war heroes stood trial, protests erupted across the galaxy, with humans hailing him as a savior and Kobali demanding his execution. The tribunal listened, captivated yet horrified, as Russell described the brutal calculus of war. The Kobali, a ruthless spacefaring empire, had attacked unprovoked, bombarding human colonies and massacring millions. Outmatched by the aliens' superior technology and numbers, humanity's survival hung by a thread. As the Kobali burned world after world, Captain Russell rallied Earth's battered fleets for a desperate counterattack. I had a choice, Russell told the court, his voice raw with emotion. Watch humanity be slaughtered, or do whatever it takes to stop them. Russell's tactics were brutal and effective. He targeted Kobali industry, obliterating their shipyards and factories. He rained fire on their staging points and supply lines. When the Kobali fleets kept coming, he struck their worlds, incinerating entire cities to cripple their ability to make war. Trillions watched as Russell's speech was broadcast across the stars. The Kobali have destroyed countless civilizations before us, Russell challenged, meeting the burning gaze of Ambassador Belos, there to demand his harshest sentencing. I could not let humanity be their next victim. I ended their ability to wage war the only way I could, by bringing the war to them. The tribunal watched in stunned silence as battle footage played, showing human ships unleashing an apocalyptic bombardment on Kobali worlds. Cities burned under the onslaught, the death toll in the billions. If I must pay for my crimes with my life, so be it, Russell snarled defiantly. Because my actions ensured the survival of the human race against an enemy that wanted only our extinction. The trial threatened to reignite hostilities between the two species, with tensions rising to a breaking point. The stakes could not be higher, as the tribunal's judgment would either prevent or provoke another catastrophic war, one that could consume the galaxy in the fires of human and Kobali vengeance. The tribunal sits in stunned silence as the prosecution presents damning evidence of Captain Russell's use of banned biological weapons against Kobali colonies. Gasps echo through the courtroom as holographic displays show the devastating effects of the genetically engineered plagues unleashed upon Kobali worlds, cities choked with corpses, bodies piled in the streets, and hospitals overflowing with the dying. Under the relentless cross-examination of Prosecutor Zaxxon, Russell's composure begins to crack. His face twists in anguish as Zaxxon demands an explanation for the wanton slaughter of Kobali civilians. "What choice did I have?" Russell shouts, thumping his hand on the table. "The Kobali were exterminating us. They were burning our worlds, massacring our people. They used bioweapons first, targeting our food supplies, our livestock, our crops. Millions starved." The courtroom falls silent as Russell's words hang in the air. Zaxxon presses on, calling Commander Javier Mendez to the stand. Mendez, his face lined with guilt and exhaustion, recounts a harrowing incident during the war. "Captain Russell ordered me to destroy a Kobali refugee convoy," Mendez says, his voice trembling. "Thousands of civilians, families, children, all fleeing the fighting. Russell said we couldn't let a single Kobali survive, that they'd come back to haunt us." Mendez describes the carnage, the screams of the dying as human ships rained fire upon the defenseless convoy. The tribunal listens in horror, the weight of Russell's actions sinking in. As the trial unfolds, the lines between aggressor and victim blur. Both sides present evidence of atrocities committed in the name of survival. The Kobali Ambassador Belos, his scales rippling with barely contained rage, denounces Russell as a war criminal. But then, a murmur of confusion spreads through the court as an unexpected figure takes the stand. Zoran, a Kobali defector and resistance fighter. Zoran's testimony sends shockwaves through the courtroom as he reveals the Kobali's long history of conquest and subjugation. "The Kobali have enslaved countless species before humanity," Zoran declares, his eyes haunted by memory. I witnessed Belos himself order the execution of human prisoners, even civilians. The Imperium's cruelty knows no bounds. Russell's actions, while brutal, pale in comparison to the Cabali's crimes against the galaxy. The courtroom erupts into chaos at Zoran's words. Cabali delegates shout in protest, their cries of traitor and liar ringing out. Security forces rush to restore order as a recess is called, the tribunal struggling to maintain control. In the brief respite, Russell confers with his defense team, led by the brilliant Professor Elena Vogel. Vogel, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, proposes a bold strategy. We must focus on the Cabali's pattern of aggression, their history of enslaving and exterminating other species, Vogel urges. Frame your actions as a last resort, a tragic necessity to ensure humanity's survival in the face of annihilation. Russell nods, his heart made with determination. He knows the price he may pay for his actions, but if it means exposing the Cabali's true nature and securing lasting peace for humanity, he will gladly bear the cost. As the trial resumes, all eyes fall upon Russell as he takes the stand, ready to lay bare his soul and fight for his species, no matter the consequences. The fate of both humans and Cabali hangs in the balance, the tribunal's judgment poised to reshape the destiny of the galaxy itself. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Zoran's testimony concluded. Cabali delegates leapt to their feet, mandibles clicking furiously as they hurled insults at the defector. "Traitor! Liar!" Their shouts echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Ambassador Belos rose slowly, his scales flushing a deep crimson. "I demand the tribunal disregard these slanderous lies," he bellowed, voice cracking with barely contained rage. Security forces rushed to restore order, their stun batons crackling with energy. Captain Russell seized the moment of confusion, his voice cutting through the din. "I call for the video evidence to be presented." A hush fell over the assembly as the holographic display flickered to life. The footage, grainy but unmistakable, showed a scene of horror unfolding on the human colony of New Dresden. Belos stood impassively in the foreground, overseeing as Cabali death squads systematically executed row after row of human civilians. Men, women, children, none were spared. The sickening crack of disruptor fire punctuated each fall of a body. Russell's eyes never left Belos as the footage played out its grim tale. When it concluded, he spoke, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. "Ambassador, I challenge you to deny the evidence of your own actions." Belos sputtered incoherently, his composure shattering. This is nothing but human propaganda." But even as he spoke, his own aides shrank back, revulsion evident on their faces. Professor Vogel stepped forward, her datapad projecting a cascade of ancient star charts and historical records. "The tribunal must consider the Cabali's long history of conquest and subjugation," she declared. "The Yeth, the Clovar, over a dozen sentient species have suffered enslavement or extinction at Cabali hands." As damning evidence continued to mount, the Cabali delegation's protests grew increasingly desperate. "The tribunal itself is nothing but a tool of the humans," one shouted, mandibles quivering. Throughout it all, Russell remained silent, his face a mask of iron will. When he finally took the stand, the weight of countless lives lost seemed to press down upon his shoulders. "I watched as Cabali troops bayoneted newborn infants," Russell began, his voice raw. "I saw entire cities reduced to ash by flesh-melting bioweapons. The death toll." He paused, swallowing hard. "It rose into the billions as the Cabali systematically exterminated every human they could find." Tears streamed freely down Russell's face as he recounted the loss of his family. "My wife, my 4 children, all gone when Avalon was obliterated." His fists clenched at his sides. "But I would bear this pain 1,000 times over if it meant ensuring humanity's survival against the Cabali's genocidal campaign." The courtroom sat in stunned silence, the full weight of Russell's testimony hanging heavy in the air. The courtroom fell silent as Russell finished his testimony. A palpable tension hung in the air, broken only by the soft whir of holographic displays and the occasional shuffle of feet. Even the most stoic members of the tribunal appeared shaken, their alien features contorted in expressions of horror and disbelief. Ambassador Belos rose from his seat, his scales rippling with barely contained fury. He strode to the center of the chamber, mandibles clicking rapidly as he prepared to speak. The Kobali diplomat's eyes darted nervously around the room before settling on the tribunal. "Esteemed members of the court," Belos began, his voice quavering slightly, "I must reveal a truth long hidden from the galaxy. The Kobali, we too have suffered unimaginable horrors." A wave of murmurs swept through the assembly. Belos continued, his words growing more impassioned. "Eons ago, an ancient race known as the Bylori waged a campaign of extermination against our people. Billions perished, hundreds of worlds burned." Holographic displays flickered to life, showing grainy footage of devastated Kobali cities and piles of corpses. "This primal trauma has driven us ever since," Belos declared. "We struck at humanity out of fear, desperate to ensure our own survival." Russell leaned forward, whispering urgently to his defense counsel. Professor Vogel nodded, tapping rapidly on her datapad. As Belos concluded his impassioned plea, Russell stood. "Ambassador," he said, his voice steady and clear, "while the atrocities committed by the Bylori were indeed horrific, they do not justify the Kobali's actions." Russell gestured, and new holograms sprang to life. They showed the ruins of countless alien civilizations, all bearing the marks of Kobali conquest. "For centuries, your people have subjugated and exterminated species that posed no threat. You built an empire on the ashes of dead worlds." The captain's eyes blazed as he continued. "Your crusade against humanity was based on nothing but paranoia and bloodlust. We were your latest victims, not your aggressors." Belos sputtered, mandibles gnashing in rage. He jabbed a clawed finger at Russell. "If this butcher is not convicted, the Kobali will consider it an act of war." The chamber erupted in shouts and cries of alarm. Security drones buzzed frantically, trying to restore order. Belos activated a comm device on his wrist, and suddenly the courtroom's displays were filled with images of massive Kobali warfleets. The ominous boom of charging weapons echoed through the chamber. Russell stood tall, unflinching in the face of the threat. He locked eyes with Belos, his voice ringing out clear and defiant. "If the Kobali choose war, humanity will fight to our last breath. We will end this cycle of genocide, either through your extinction or your submission to true lasting peace." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted and argued, some praising Russell's tenacity, others condemning him as a warmonger. As security forces struggled to regain control, the Chief Justice of the tribunal banged his gavel, calling for order. "This court stands adjourned," the justice boomed. "We will reconvene to render our judgment in 3 solar cycles." As Russell was led from the chamber, he could hear the roar of protests erupting outside the courthouse. The fate of trillions hung in the balance, with the tribunal's decision poised to either usher in an era of peace or ignite the fires of galactic Armageddon. The courtroom erupted into chaos as the chief adjudicator's words reverberated through the chamber. Captain Russell, his face a mask of shock, found himself suddenly grabbed by the arms. 2 burly security officers, their faces hidden behind opaque visors, yanked him towards the exit. "What's the meaning of this?" Russell demanded, struggling against their iron grip. "I have a right to hear the verdict." Professor Vogel leapt to her feet, datapad clattering to the floor. "This is an outrage," she shouted, her voice barely audible above the growing din. "You can't remove my client. It violates every principle of—" Her protests were cut short as a phalanx of heavily armed guards stormed into the room. Their boots thudded against the polished floor, the sound like a funeral dirge. Russell craned his neck, catching a final glimpse of the courtroom as he was forcibly dragged away. The last thing he saw was Ambassador Belos, the Kobali's eyes burning with a hatred so intense it seemed to scorch the very air. Then the doors slammed shut, cutting off the cacophony of shouts and protests. Russell found himself unceremoniously shoved into a small, sterile holding room. The walls were a dull gray, broken only by a single, flickering light panel. He paced back and forth, each step echoing in the confined space. Minutes stretched into hours. Russell's mind raced, imagining every possible outcome. Had he doomed humanity? Or had his actions saved his species from extinction? Suddenly, the door hissed open. A stone-faced guard gestured for Russell to follow. "The verdict has been reached," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are to return to the courtroom." As Russell re-entered the chamber, he was struck by the transformation. Gone was the orderly decorum of a galactic court. In its place was a scene of utter pandemonium. The Kobali delegation howled in outrage, their scaled skin flushed dark with fury. Ambassador Bellos stood at their center, mandibles clicking rapidly as he spat curses in a dozen languages. On the other side, human observers cheered and embraced, tears of joy and relief streaming down their faces. Russell's eyes found Professor Vogel. The normally composed lawyer's face was ashen, her eyes wide with disbelief. She mouthed something to him, but her words were lost in the tumult. As the implications of the verdict sank in, Russell felt a weight settle onto his shoulders. He had won. Humanity was safe. But at what cost? The Kobali, an entire civilization, had been cast out, condemned, perhaps even marked for extinction. He gazed up at the vaulted ceiling, its intricate patterns suddenly seeming like a maze with no exit. In saving his people, had he become the very monster he'd fought against? The question burned in his mind, unanswered and unanswerable, as the guards led him away once more.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.